All their scenarios you see on their videos is in a factory, in a warehouse. Whenever I've been there, they all have flat floors.
Are humanoid robots a really stupid idea? Hello and welcome to TechFirst. My name is John Koetsier. Over 100 companies globally are developing humanoids. There's tens of billions of dollars being invested in this right now. The number of companies working on this seems to be growing every day. Meta's making one. We heard that a couple of months ago. Amazon is making one. We heard that literally yesterday or today. Apparently, that's for last mile delivery. But is all this effort just kind of a new tulip bulb craze? Are we all kind of slightly insane here, maybe chasing something pretty and sparkly that isn't as great as other things? Possibly. To chat, we have robotics OG Bren Pierce. He's the CEO of Kinisi Robots. He's also a serial entrepreneur. He's actually worked on one of the first humanoid robot teams, working with Samsung and others who are building Honda's Asimo. Remember Asimo? That's got to be 20 years ago, 30. That's crazy. It's a while ago. We're dating ourselves, even talking about it. But do we need legs to have a great robot? Welcome, Bren. How are you?
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me, John.
I am super pumped for this conversation. I love contrarians. We should have a great conversation. We have a lot of great topics to talk about, and we'll have some jazz and we'll just do some cool stuff. I'll start off with the question that I kind of posed right at the end of my intro. Do we need legs on robots?
Well, I think you have to really say what are the legs useful for? I think obviously you're going to have legged robots. There'll be some aspects of it, but one of my takes is, do we need legs now, or are we actually missing one of the key features to enable them, which is the AI? We've been seeing cool demos from Boston Dynamics for nearly 20 years now. As you pointed at the beginning, we had Asimo, God, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. You had even better robots coming out of some of these cool labs like MIT or CMU. The question now is, what has changed? And in that regard, I'd say it's the AI that's powering this.
Also, of course, those early robots, Boston Dynamics, they were hydraulic, right? And now we have electrical actuators. So there's some change there. Honestly, hydraulics are really amazing. They have their downsides as well in terms of size and maybe some crankiness and stuff like that. But they are obviously pretty cool as well. I guess the question is, if you have a robot, you can have legs, or you can have it wheeled, or you can have a stationary robot if it's just doing a job in an area and the work comes to it. If we look at humanoid robots and the tens of billions of dollars that are being invested in that right now globally, we're talking China, United States, Europe, many other places. Are they just too expensive and complicated?
Well, I think you have to sort of split that up into two sections. It's not just humanoids that they've been developing, it's really the foundational models that they're based upon. Like, how do you actually give these robots the vision, the logic, and also the manipulation so they can go around, pick up tools, use them, and really interact with the environment? And I see that is the biggest goal for the next 10 years. How to design a robot that can actually pick up use a printer, use a computer, so you
Mhm.
don't actually also have to program them to do all the stages. Can you actually just use natural language and say, please go and do this task, please can you do that task, without having to have a fleet of engineers behind it to program every single step?
And that seems to be the way we're going, right? We're using LLMs to do that. We're essentially robots are learning to do things rather than being taught. And I mean, I've talked about that before. If you have to program everything a robot is doing, it's unbelievably tedious, right? Like, go get me a knife and cut a tomato. There's so much background information, knowledge. Where are the knives? Where's the tomato? What is a tomato? What is a knife? How do I use it? Do I need a cutting board? Where do I walk? How do I walk? All that stuff. How hard do I hold a tomato? Do I crush it in my hand? All those things, right? There, it's in, and that's one of the simplest possible things that you might want for, let's say, a humanoid for home service. So we're seeing people use LLMs and robots kind of understanding the world. We're also seeing them take a bit of time, right? Like ChatGPT is not instant, right? Claude's not instant, right? And so if you have to query ChatGPT, how delicate is a tomato, right? How much pressure can I apply, right? And so you see some solutions, some humanoid robots, there's built-in intelligence right on the edge, and so they know a few things. And they've got a small, relatively small LLM running on board, right? And other things they're going to the cloud for, and other things like that. How do you see the future there?
I think it's going to be play out similar to autonomous cars, where obviously what's been advertised now is this humanoid robot that can come into your house, can do everything and anything. That's obviously probably 10 years away, but you have to say, what can you do in the next couple of years? That's where personally my own company, it's like, all right, you need a semi-structured environment. So think of like more a
Mm.
warehouse or factory where it's a repetitive task. So you can actually spend some time, train the robot to do per task, go here, pick up this box, bring it back. Or in a factory scenario, you could spend 1 or 2 days to train the robot to pick up an item, take it somewhere else, or use a drill. I think that's more realistic in the next couple of years. Then going back to your original question, John, do you really need wheels or sorry, do you need legs now? Or is that something you need in 5 years' time? Because my personal opinion is most of these places where you see them deploy, whether or not that's Figure, whether or not it's that Boston Dynamics, all their scenarios you see on their videos is in a factory, in a warehouse. Whenever I've been there, they all have flat floors. So then you get to the question, is it just to raise money, VCs, they like something shiny, or is it more of a practicality myself is why not focus on the AI, which is the actual game changer in this next wave of robotics? And also, even just like the unit economics, two motors will always outperform in a cost comparison than 14 very expensive, very high quality servo motors you need on a leg.
It's really interesting you brought up VCs because I just had the CEO of Apptronic on and we were chatting about that. And he was saying, like, a couple years ago, no one wanted to hear about humanoid form factors. It was like, go away, go away. And now everybody wants it. It's the hot, sexy thing. All the investors want it, and everybody's throwing billions of dollars at it. I also want to bring up something else because you're the conservative here who's saying, hey, maybe we don't need that right now. But do you understand how revolutionary it is what you just said? Even as the conservative in the room, you said, maybe we need that legs in 5 years. And you said, maybe that robot that can do everything is in the house in 10 years. I mean, they're a little more conservative timeframes than I've heard from some others, including Peter Diamandis, right? But that's not a long time in the scheme of things. That's pretty freaking amazing if the conservative is saying in 10 years you have a robot in your house and it'll do everything.
That is true. Bear in mind, I spent 10 years in academia, building humanoid robots. When I left academia to do my first robot startup, I was like, do I build a humanoid? Because that is my true passion. But then at the same time, I also like money. So I'm like, all right, let's just build an AMR. It goes from A to B. And I think that is more my incremental of my career and the company. I can leverage 10 years of building AMR bases, and then actually then concentrate myself
Mm-hmm.
on the AI. If you have the resources of Google or Nvidia, why not shoot for the 10-year moonshot? More my opinion is you need to ship robots into the real world for what everyone's saying, the flywheel. The more
Mm-hmm.
robots you have out there, the more data you get, the more you can actually train these models. So my opinion is get them out into much simpler environment, i.e. warehouse factories, places that are flat, and actually you could then spend your time concentrating on driving around. And what I like to call the last 30 centimeter problem, that is like manipulating objects, using tools. That is the real unlock. Once you have that, then you can go for the fanciness of humanoids. I even been saying this for about 15 years myself. I see a humanoid a bit like a Ferrari. If you're rich and you have money to burn, you're going to have a humanoid in your house. But most people then go to buy a Honda Civic. That's why you have a Roomba and things like that instead of having like a butler in your house.
I love that. That's awesome. I have a 3-story house. I'm going to need the Ferrari because the Roomba will fall down the stairs, but hopefully
Well, I
the
think this. Yeah, I think though this also comes into, what is a humanoid? Obviously, technically my robot is a mobile manipulator, but you obviously get on the bus train by saying it's a humanoid robot. I have seen a lot of the designs that are not like a robot on legs that's classical humanoid.
Mhm.
There's some really cool robots I've seen which is basically a robot dog that can stand on its hind legs with wheels, for
Mhm.
example. I've
Mhm.
also seen ones that other form factor, and you said about your 3-story house. Does the robot need to take like 1 minute to get up the stairs, or would 10 minutes be so where it's like falls on its side? I don't know. There's some interesting form factors. One of the things I always think in my head, going back to like the Henry Ford sayings, if you were designing a car, would you make it actually a horse with 4 legs, or would you design a car with 3 wheel or 4 wheels, sorry, an engine instead of going straight to the horse design?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, like, let's make the spider robot, right? It's got 8 legs or 10 legs or something like that. It can go anywhere and it's pretty easy to do and all that stuff. And, nobody wants it in their house because it's creepy, right? So, humanoid, I mean, we kind of can identify with, but I mean, a dog form works. And obviously, we see that as well from Boston Dynamics, other manufacturers. There's a Chinese manufacturer that does that as well. And those can be great for surveillance, sort of guard type duty, right? And you could have literally wheels in the end of those 4 legs, and so it can roll on a flat surface, and then it can actually lock those wheels and then climb when it hits something that is not flat. So you can do a lot of different things. That makes a ton of sense. One of the reasons that people say, hey, humanoids make sense is they can use human tools and vehicles. They can live in a world which has been designed to accommodate us with our hands, with our fingers, with our feet, with our legs, all that stuff. They can get in a vehicle, drive somewhere, stop, get the package out of the back, walk it to the front door and deliver it, knock on the front door and say, here you go, ma'am, or something like that, right? Does that cut in? Does that make sense to you, or is that
No,
still?
no, 100%. No, I do think you're going to have like a range of different embodiments. You're going to have your humanoid, you're going to have your quadruped, you're going to have real robots. I think in my personal opinion, it's not going to be like the humanoid form factor is the one that you're going to have everything. Every robot's going to be this. So I think there's just going to be a range from a Roomba style robot that's just like a two-wheeled little vacuum cleaner, all the way up to your 100-ton massive mining machine that's just crawling the earth for rare, minerals as well as just like refining them coming out the back. So I think you're just going to have this crazy sci-fi future.
Wow, that's amazing. It's funny also you brought up hands and you said the last 30, the 30 centimeter barrier, the last 30 centimeters. I forget exactly how you said it, but it was cool. And I wanted to come back to that actually. I did talk to the CEO of Sanctuary AI, Jordy Rose, and he talked about hands being 50% of the complexity of a robot, right? I mean, our hands are amazing. We can sense tiny little gradations. We can grab something gently. We can grab something super heavy. They self repair. They do get a little messy sometimes when you have crazy cats in the house, but they self repair. They're incredible things. Talk about hands and manipulators and various types of things that will help robots do work.
Yeah, you're right. I think in a mechanical sense that the hand is basically the hardest thing out there. How do you sense how you wouldn't believe how hard it is to make a hand as compact as a human hand and as can do all the crazy manipulation. I think where DLR about 10 years ago had probably the most accurate hands out there, and they had like 120 motors and hundreds of tendons just to give us the dexterity of a human hand. So
Wow.
then you come back to, what do you need? How do you have it? I don't think a 5 finger hand, a 3 finger, 4 finger. For our robot, we have a hot change, so we can just change it because you might want just like a 2 finger gripper that has a lot of force. You might want we'd be developing to peel a label off a label from a printer to put on a packaging because that's just such a
That's
hard
hard.
dexterity incredibly. So it's like we've been trying to develop custom things like, do you have pincers? This is the sort of thing. It's like eventually you might have one hand to rule them all, but that's still a hard PhD problem that you ask everyone, they have a different opinion. That's where we're hedging our bets and having like 3 or 4 different types, from a vacuum gripper to tweezers to parallel. We've seen it comes also down to price. If price is no object, go back to the Ferrari, then a 5 finger hand is
Mhm.
is the end goal. But when you talk to most of these manufacturers and you're like, this is great, how much the hand costs? They're like $15,000 per hand. You're like 30,000 for hands. It's just incredibly expensive if and that's like, how do you then get as a business case, what do you need to do what job? If you're in the warehouse picking up boxes, 5 finger doesn't work. If you want one that could play the piano or a musical instrument, and in your scenario, get in the car, do everything, then I think probably 4 fingers, maybe five if you want redundancy.
I love your point about hot swappable. I mean, and I think that's super interesting in the warehouse, in the factory, in the workplace, let's say construction or something like that, right? And you can see a scenario where you have construction robots, which is a very challenging situation. It's not like a warehouse. Not everything is where it's supposed to be, right? It's not always flat. Sometimes there's debris around, all that stuff. But you can swap out, now I need a drill. Here's the drill attachment, right? Just fits right on. Now I need a saw. Here's the saw. That would be super interesting. And then you can design to purpose, fit to purpose for that specific need. And that makes tons of sense. You can have different ones on each hand, so you can grip and cut and grip, and that makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, because when I was doing my first startup, when I was just finishing my PhD, I was thinking about actually commercializing my PhD work in humanoids. And there, actually, I was doing the business case for the kitchen. You could actually have all the tools. So the knife, frying pan could actually be similar to a CNC machine that snaps in. It's like if you're spending 30,000 on a robot, you surely 400, $500. So all your kitchenware, instead of having to have a hand that fits every knife, does
Mm-hmm.
your robot just come
Mm-hmm.
with knives, frying pans,
Yeah.
saucers, and
Yeah.
it just literally clicks in? It could just be a simpler solution than a complex hand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Actually, that's a really interesting point you bring up, because kitchen robots, we saw Flippy, the hamburger maker, probably 2 3 years ago or something like that, maybe a little bit more. You've also seen some super high end kitchen developers where it's just arms and then storage, cold storage and stuff like that. You see some development, and that is not a robot that moves, but it's a robot that makes all your food. Those are still early in development, but there's a lot of options there. I want to talk about speed. And speed is important. I remember, I think it was Figure AI. Between Figure 1 and Figure 2, they had some insane level of speed up just in walking and moving. It was like 4x, 5x, or something like that, right? But let's face it, humanoids and most robots, robotic arms, are slow, at least those that are designed to work in concert in close proximity to humans, right? And it's way slower than a human. It's like, pick up the cup, bring it to, all those. This is not a product placement, by the way, but not getting paid by Coke. But how can we fix that problem?
It's not a hardware. Hardware can go as fast as you want. The problem is the whole compute. You have a camera comes in, the camera might be 30 to 60 hertz. Then you have to compute trajectory. Then the worst case scenario now is you have this AI model that's having to do several levels from like the long-term thinking at like 10 hertz down to like a controller at 100 hertz. So the question is there you have the latency from the photos coming into the camera to the actions coming out. So the robot could go as fast as it can, but if you want to plan it, you want to make sure that there's safety, you're not hitting things. So you end up all this layer, even gives you latency going through, but then you just have the compute. If you modern humanoid robots have like 5 or 6 cameras all running at like HD, and then you're having to process all those pixels, and then you're having to do a safe trajectory out. That's actually where the latency, not is in actually in the speed of the actual motors.
Super, super interesting, because the environment's changing as well, right? If there's a human around and you don't
Exactly.
want to smack the human in the head or something like that. And that speaks to compute being a limiter here. I mean, you need a freaking supercomputer on board, right? Not one that you're talking to that's, 3 seconds of latency away or something like that. And like I said earlier, LLMs have latency, right? I actually talked to a computer scientist who's built an LLM the other day, and I was talking about ChatGPT, and I said, I ask it a question, and then you see the answer come in sort of line by line, right? And I said, is it just doing that because it thinks that's the speed I can process at, or is that the speed it's actually processing at? And he says, that's the speed it's actually processing at. And so that means that if you are using some kind of large language model AI system or something else that's AI based, you need a lot of hardware on board to be snappy and quick and fast.
Yeah, so I know some very well-funded multinational companies that do robotic research, and they have like H100s or H200s on board.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and I think their business case is they don't have a business one because they're a multinational corporation with too much money. They're just like, all right, we just need as much compute as we can do on board, so that in 5 years' time, this will hopefully be down to $500. But you're right. If you take your thing like, why does it take like so long for like the figure things for their demos? you have this slow LLM make a decision, oh, you need to pick up this, and that goes into what we call the vision action model that tells the faster one that then has the camera comes in, goes through that, and be like, all right, control the motors. And that is where you get this latency from the high level agent going into the slightly faster, but not as fast as classical controllers.
Interesting stuff. Okay, so we've talked about humanoids. We talked about, hey, probably the future is hundreds of different form factors. Who knows? We're going to see what it looks like. Are we at least learning valuable things in this kind of humanoid space race that everybody is jumping on the bandwagon for? Are we at least learning valuable things from all this effort and all this investment that will spill over to all areas of robotics, perhaps? And of course, also potentially advance humanoid robots themselves.
Yeah, I think you're correct. At least this time, compared to, let's say, crypto or the dot com, these were actually going into fundamental research, or I could just be biased in my opinion on this. But you have to also remember, luckily for robotics, this last wave that's literally happened in the last 2 years has, building on the shoulders of giants was only made possible from a large language models that obviously Facebook, well, Meta nowadays, Google, Nvidia be building, and also this internet scale vision processor. So now, 2 years ago, when I realized you could actually build this robot, you take a photo of a label, and this is actually what I did, and asked ChatGPT, what is the delivery address? And it gave me a perfect delivery address where this parcel has to go. You're like, great, now a robot can actually go to a parcel, take a picture, send it to its LOM, and then be like, all right, of these 10 outbound trucks, where should it actually go? And it could do this on board. Whereas before, you would have had to have 10 engineers, 3 months to write all of this logic, have to have a scanner,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then if you go to another company, you'd have to have all this other logic. Now the robot can actually use the vision and see what's happening. A perfect example is, instead of, for our pilot customers, instead of having to integrate into the warehouse operating system, we can actually read exactly the same screen that a human operator has that tells them, go and pick these two items from these three shelves. So we can actually do it, read it into our AI system without having to integrate into the warehouse. What that allows us to do as a company is we can go and do these pilots very easily. Whereas before, a lot of these companies that have failed in the last 10 years had this problem. They would have to go
Mm-hmm.
spend 2 to 3 months before they could even start a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the pilot doesn't happen, or if it fizzles out, you're like, we just wasted like 500,000 on a failed pilot. Whereas we can go in and literally our first pilot, within 2 days, we could actually have a system up and running just by training our system.
That's a hugely, hugely, hugely important point. I mean, you get so much for free with these new AI models that you can focus your development efforts and your scarce resources, dollars, time, people, on unique challenges that you have. I absolutely love that. That makes a ton of sense. I want to ask you kind of a geopolitical question because I've talked to a bunch of different people in humanoid robotics and robotics in general, just about, hey, this is kind of a space race. The people who get there first or get there really, really well to have effective, efficient robots that are not that expensive will have a huge impact on that nation's economy, their productivity, their international level of competitiveness, all that stuff. And it's interesting, right? Half the robots in existence are in China, lots in manufacturing. Almost zero of those are humanoids, although they have many humanoid startups there. Many of the humanoid startups are in either China or the United States. There's a couple in Europe. There's one in Canada. There's a few out scattered here and there. But Europe has a strong history in manufacturing robots and industrial robots. Denmark, Robot Island, right? Odense, other places like that. The UK, other places, Germany. Talk about how you see the future evolving with robotics, automation, and international competitiveness.
Yeah, it's semi hard to predict because the whole
I thought
goal
it
of
was an easy
having
one. I thought that was like a
no,
softball. It's like
yeah, because the whole with robotics, it would democratize labor because then the advantage Asia and China particularly have is low cost. Whereas if the robots are the same cost, then Europe actually then can actually start manufacturing again. The only thing is, do we have the will? Do we have the companies? And do we have the the core competency to actually do this. My company is based half it in America for sales, marketing, and things. In Europe, we actually have a lot of engineers. The problem is England has, and quite a lot of Europe has no manufacturing base.
Mhm.
So then it's the chicken and the egg. Can we bootstrap European manufacturing to start building robots again? I would say probably not, unfortunately. So then it's basically a two-horse race. You have America that has incredibly good AI technology. You have China that's not far. We saw from DeepSeek behind it, and incredible manufacturing. This is where you can get to, unfortunately, the geopolitical, where, the administration in America has put limitations on GPT and AI
Mhm.
exports to China. Does China just retaliate and stop exporting, the hardware? You know,
Mhm.
Unfortunately for people
Mhm.
in America or Europe, at least, most of the components I buy are all from Asia.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what happens if they suddenly China goes like, oh, there's going to be a 50% tariff export on servo motors, on all these components that we rely on, and then China then goes has a massive advantage on the hardware.
Mhm.
Who is Nvidia, Google, myself? What hardware do we put our AI models on? Then the Chinese manufacturers of robotics go, hardware costs half the price. We're very clever people. Can they actually then do what we did to them? I say we're not going to export any of these robotic components. Cameras.
It's really super interesting. I mean, and we obviously saw it. I think most people who are watching or listening to this will understand this already, but there's many people in the US or Europe who do not understand this. And we see that with the tariffs that they recently put on, just make it in America, right? And then you had all these business owners who are importing things like, I literally cannot make it in America because there's like 53 components to this particular product. And there's this complex of integrated manufacturing capability in various areas elsewhere, primarily in China, but elsewhere as well. And that all works in a beautiful synchronous way to actually come together and form this one thing, right? And so I can get three of those things in America, or I can get seven of those things or something like that. But one is 3,000 kilometers away. The other is 7,000 kilometers away. It's not co-located. It's not easy. You don't have these hubs. You can build a manufacturing base, but it takes decades of effort and government investment and long-term thinking, which we haven't seen in any administration in the United States for sure. Europe might have an advantage here in that the EU typically does have some foresight and some ability to do things with some longevity. And we've seen that in certain areas. And there's an obvious pressure to build it here so we can control it. We saw that during COVID, right? How vulnerable are you when you don't control the resources you need or the tools you need or the other things? And so maybe we'll see some things there, but you're right. It looks unbelievably challenging.
I'd say it's even more fundamental than that, unfortunately. At my previous company, when we went to go to mass manufacturing, we actually looked around America for injection molded or die cast places so we can actually get the plastic and the metal made. When we went to all these places, virtually none of them made the tools anymore. So
Yeah.
they actually make all the injection molded tools, are all made in China,
Yeah.
tested in China, and then shipped to America to make it. So if China just said you can't export any die casting or injection molding things, I don't think there's the capacity in the rest of the world to even make this or the knowledge, because they are so crazy how to make these die
Yeah.
cast
Yeah.
things. And then you're basically back to the Stone Age, because you like, if we can't injection mold parts, how do you make things to injection mold parts?
Oh man. Oh man. I mean, there's where you start thanking God or whoever you happen to believe in that the world economy is interdependent. And if China didn't take in any outside dollars, then there'd be a problem there as well. So, but yeah, okay. It's a challenging world. Let's leave the world of economics and manufacturing, which is challenging, and come back to robotics and maybe let's end here. Take out your crystal ball and knowing what you know and what you see and where you sit, how do you see the future of robotics over the next couple of years?
I think it's going to evolve so fast. It's surprising me when like 6 months ago, when I went to a lot of these academic conferences, seeing the work they were doing 6 months ago to seeing what they're doing now is mind blowing. Add to the fact that 80% of the time when I'm actually coding myself, it's done by ChatGPT, and that's just getting faster. And you just get this flywheel where in like a couple of years' time, I might have been wrong with my previous assumptions, but I think the robotics in the labs will be incredible. I think it's going to be like the cars. It's going to be the limiting factors actually just going to be regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And some of
Mm-hmm.
these petty little things, what happens when you hit an e-stop on a humanoid robot when it falls down? And then
Mm-hmm.
more lawyers than actually the technology, I think, will hold this back, a bit like autonomous cars.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I could see that. We see the same thing in drones, drone technology, drone delivery, regulation, bureaucracy, even just our governments move so slowly compared to the technology. Hopefully, we can speed that up a little bit because we see that they're just so far behind in so many places. A lot of smart people working on that. Hopefully, they have success. I want to thank you. This has been a ton of fun, a super interesting conversation. I really appreciate it. And I know you're staying up super late. You're in the UK. It's like 3:30 my time. It's got to be like 9:30 or 10:30 your time. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.